Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving straight into a deeply analytical look at the darkest corners of human psychology. We're going to unpack the methodology, the twisted mindsets, and the ultimate downfalls of some of history's absolute most chilling figures. Based on deep investigative source material, we'll explore exactly how these predators operated and, more importantly, how they were finally brought to justice.
Here is our agenda for today. We'll be analyzing 4 notorious cases: Richard Ramirez, Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy, and Ted Bundy. Then we'll pull all of this together to examine the anatomy of evil.
Okay, Section 1. The Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez.
If you want to understand the sheer, absolute terror of Richard Ramirez's 1980s crime spree across California, you really just have to look at what he said at his sentencing. After being condemned for 13 brutal murders, the guy casually smirked and told the courtroom, "Big deal, death always went with the territory. See you in Disneyland." I mean, wow. It just perfectly captures his complete absence of remorse, his deep-seated narcissism, and this incredibly disturbing, bravado-filled public persona that somehow attracted a cult-like following of admirers while he was sitting behind bars.
So how does someone even get to that point? Well, back in 1973, a young Ramirez was heavily influenced by his cousin Mike, a violent Vietnam veteran who actually murdered his own wife right in front of a 13-year-old Ramirez. This early exposure to brutal violence really escalated over the years into a chaotic, satanic killing spree starting in 1984. And it finally ended in August 1985, not by some brilliant police maneuver, but literally when an angry mob recognized his mugshot in Los Angeles and chased him down in the street.
What makes Ramirez so uniquely terrifying is how he hunted. He completely lacked a specific victim profile. He didn't target a certain age, race, or gender at all. His hunting ground was simply California homes, people sleeping in their very own beds. It made his random home invasions a total nightmare because, quite literally, anyone could be a target. And the crucial breakthrough? That only happened because a surviving victim memorized details that led police to a stolen car, where they managed to pull a single damning fingerprint.
Moving on to Section 2. The Milwaukee Monster, Jeffrey Dahmer.
Now, Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes completely shocked the world. But unlike Ramirez's random, chaotic fury, Dahmer was driven by a profound, truly terrifying fear of abandonment. As he confessed later, he said, "I had urges I could not control." His twisted need for absolute companionship and total control led to the methodical drugging, murder, and dismemberment of 17 young men. He literally wanted to turn his victims into subservient, permanent companions.
It's the ultimate horrific duality, right? By day, he was just an unassuming, quiet guy wrapping chocolate at a local factory. He didn't bother his neighbors, he just blended in perfectly. But by night, he was a sadistic predator, using a drill to perform amateur lobotomies, dissolving bodies in acid, and hoarding human remains in his refrigerator. It's a stark reminder that true darkness doesn't always look like a movie monster. Sometimes it looks exactly like an average Joe.
And you know, this went on for well over a decade, entirely under the radar. He killed his first victim right out of high school back in 1978. Because he deliberately preyed on marginalized individuals and vulnerable, estranged youth, which is a truly cowardly predatory tactic, their disappearances just weren't heavily investigated. It wasn't until July 1991 when a victim named Tracy Edwards miraculously escaped with handcuffs still dangling from his wrist and flagged down a patrol car that police were finally led directed to Dahmer's apartment of horrors.
All right, Section 3. The Killer Clown, John Wayne Gacy.
John Wayne Gacy is probably the ultimate example of a predator hiding right behind a mask of intense community respectability. The guy literally spent his weekends dressing up as Pogo the Clown to entertain children at local parties and hospitals. In fact, during a police surveillance operation right before his arrest, he actually turned to the detectives and arrogantly boasted, "Clowns can get away with murder." That terrifyingly prophetic statement really underscores the sheer psychopathic arrogance of a man harboring a massive, deadly secret right beneath his floorboards.
Gacy maliciously weaponized the trust of his community. Here is a precinct captain and a successful owner of a contracting firm, and he used that exact power to offer jobs to vulnerable teenage runaways. He deliberately preyed on youth who had nowhere else to turn. Once he lured them into his home, he'd use a seemingly innocent handcuff magic trick to lock their wrists before using chloroform to subdue and brutally torture them.
We really need to pause for a second and just reflect on the horrific scale here. 33 lives were taken, 33 young men and boys. And honestly, the most shocking detail? 27 of those bodies were discovered buried directly in the crawlspace of his seemingly normal suburban Chicago home.
He was literally hosting neighborhood parties, while a graveyard sat just inches below his guests' feet.
But how did they catch him? Well, Gacy's downfall was an absolute masterclass in applying police pressure. When 15-year-old Rob Piest vanished after telling people he was going to ask a contractor for a job, detectives immediately zeroed in on Gacy. They didn't have the bodies yet, so what did they do? They initiated 24/7 relentless surveillance. They followed him to bars, to restaurants, applying immense psychological pressure until he finally started making careless, erratic mistakes. That gave them the exact probable cause they needed for the search warrant that uncovered the crawl space.
Let's move to Section 4, the charismatic predator, Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy essentially used his high intelligence, his legal education, and his natural charisma as a weapon. He spent years playing the legal system, grandstanding in court, acting as his own defense attorney, and totally blaming society for his actions. But when you strip away all that charm and legal theater and ask point blank why he did it, Bundy's own blunt admission says it all. "'Cause I liked it." It reveals the pure, sadistic pleasure he derived from his incredibly violent acts. When you track his movements, the geographical mobility is absolutely terrifying. He utilized a highly practiced routine, often wearing a fake arm sling or leg cast and asking for help with his VW Beetle, to trap victims across Washington, Utah, and Colorado. Incredibly, because he was acting as his own lawyer, he was allowed access to a prison law library and actually escaped custody not once, but twice. This led directly to his final deeply tragic rampage at a sorority house in Florida. Despite all his legal brilliance and his careful disposal of evidence, his ultimate downfall came down to pure animalistic arrogance. During his Florida attack, he left a distinct, double bite mark impression on a victim. Sheriff Ken Kathasaris brilliantly realized this was a signature. He actually secured a search warrant for Bundy's mouth, matching his teeth to the victim, giving the jury the exact forensic evidence needed to send him straight to the electric chair.
Which brings us to Section 5, the anatomy of evil. What actually makes a monster?
When you really dig into the patterns presented by the psychological and criminal experts in our source material, the threads are remarkably consistent. You have the early childhood trauma or isolation, like Dahmer's parents' bitter divorce or Gacy's violently abusive father. You see the classic escalation from cruelty to animals right up to humans. And above all, you see a deeply malignant narcissism. To all four of these men, other human beings were not people. They were simply objects to be used to satisfy a twisted thirst for absolute power.
And our investigative sources actually clinicalize this whole concept. They don't define evil as some sensational movie plot or a supernatural force. Psychologically speaking, evil is defined as a severe, absolute absence of empathy, combined with a devastating, remorseless pursuit of inflicting pain just to gain personal power and gratification. It's a terrifyingly rational choice made by an intact mind. You know, behind all this psychological analysis, the fascinating police surveillance, and the brilliant forensic breakthroughs we've discussed today, we really have to pause. We must somberly remember the human cost. A minimum of 93 confirmed lives were lost across just these 4 cases alone. 93 futures completely erased. That is exactly why understanding the methodology of these predators is so absolutely vital.
To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative thought to chew on. Based on all the chilling evidence we've explored today, how much of this darkness is an inherent, born psychopathy, and how much is forged in the shadows of a broken society, abusive childhoods, and missed warning signs? It's a question that continues to haunt investigators today. Thanks for joining me, and keep questioning.